Well, throughout the ups and downs of the British car industry, one name has remained unchanged. Morgan. It's been making sports cars in Worcestershire for almost 100 years, unbelievably. Its vehicles might be known for their rather traditional looks, but as Rob's discovered, they have some rather radical plans for the future.
You don't often see a woodworking room in a car factory, but this is no ordinary car factory. The Morgan site in Malvern Link is a place of hand-built sports cars. It's 99 years old and the company still likes to do things in the traditional way. It takes 3 weeks to produce one of its distinctive cars. The factory turns out 640 cars a year, although that's a big increase on 10 years ago when the figure was 470. The cars are built on aluminium and wood by 160 workers, each revelling in the chance to use their specialist skills.
Oh, I'm just putting the bolts in for the seats. We have to bolt the seats through the chassis, obviously, and bolt them down like every other car, but we do it by hand, obviously, no robots here.
So you get a bit dragged doing everything by hand then, or do you get used to it?
No, we get used to it. It's part of the joy of doing it, I suppose. Like it's not automated here, as you can tell. It's nice making cars by hand, you know, I suppose.
I'm looking for the quality, make sure I've got no slip stitch. What I expect in my car, I'd want the customers to have the same. So, yeah, I don't really.
Is this something people are proud of having in Malvern as well?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. When you say, oh, I live in Malvern, oh, that's where the Morgan car factory is. So, yeah, that's what they say straight away.
But behind the traditions are very modern production methods. The cars are powered by BMW engines. They all meet strict European safety standards. The aluminium used here is produced by a supplier using a modern process that forms the parts using air pressure and heat. The company began by making these three-wheeler cars, and these were the top racers of their time. Apparently in the Brooklands races back in the 1920s, these would start a lap behind everybody else to give the rest of the field a chance, and yet they would still win. And then in the 1930s, the company took the radical step of adding a fourth wheel to its car. And so the 4.4 was born. So called because it had 4 cylinders and 4 wheels. And they're still in production here today. In fact, this is one now. And these are actually in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest running production car in the world. This would cost you around £25,000. But if we come across here, we can see the top of the range. This is an Aero 8. It's long, flowing, sleek lines here. Now, this car would cost you around £65,000. Has a top speed of 170 miles an hour, and as Jeremy Clarkson would no doubt probably not say, there's now a new kid on the block. And here it is. This is the Aero Max, about to be unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show. Richard Hammond is getting one of these. Rowan Atkinson is having one too, as is Paul O'Grady. But even if you've got a spare £110,000, which is what they cost, you can't have one yourself because they're only making 100 and they've all been sold. Despite its long heritage, the new car is a proof that even a traditional car company like this has to keep up with modern trends. Morgan is now looking at ways of meeting tough new restrictions on CO2 emissions being introduced for all car manufacturers. Charles Morgan, a grandson of the company's founder, is confident they can do it.
You go right back to our history, really. I mean, my grandfather made his name with a three-wheeler, which was an incredibly efficient vehicle. It arguably was one of the first affordable cars, really. But what was clever about it was that because it had such a high power-to-weight ratio, it was also great fun to drive. And Morgans have always been good fun to drive, so what we've done recently is we've used the latest technology from the car industry, like BMW, Ford, for our engines, but combined that with a very lightweight chassis. So, for example, the Aeromax, the car that we're producing this year as a limited edition of 100, has very low emissions and very good economy, in spite of being a sort of performance supercar.
And now there's a new venture, a hydrogen fuel cell powered sports car. The fuel cell is being provided by the specialist company Kinetic. The research is being done by scientists at Oxford University, and the car is being built by Morgan.
Aeromax is a limited production.
Matthew Humphreys is the designer. He came to the firm 3 years ago on a workplace attachment. Whilst here, he came up with the design for the Aeromax. Now he's designed an even more revolutionary car.
The Life Car is a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. Point of it for Morgan is that we can expose to the rest of the world that's, okay, little old Morgan. Most people probably don't even remember the brand. But now this sort of thing will be out there. We're exposing it to the world, and we're making it very obvious to the world what Morgan is. We're talking about the wood, the leather and the aluminium. So it's a true craftsmanship built car. It's all sustainable materials and it's real Morgan. It has Morgan DNA, it's a real sports car, and most other hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, let's face it, they're a bit boring. This thing, you'll be able to race it through the Cotswolds but not offend the people who live there, which was always the end goal of this project.
The live car is just a one-off prototype at the moment, but if it's successful it could one day go into production. Morgan will be 100 years old next year. The company's now the oldest independently owned car company in the world, but despite its long heritage, it's a firm that also seems to be planning for the future.